Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barley.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barley, and today we're going to talk about a place where there's chicanery, there's discovery, there's death, there's destruction, and we haven't come to you. And we've had a lot of requests to get to the Big Bend country, the Big Eddy,
Yeah.
Revelstoke.
All aboard for Revelstoke.
Yeah.
No doubt about it, Mike. I think it's one of these areas in British Columbia that a lot of people don't know much about. When you look around Revelstoke, whether it's the Big Bend, whether it's through the so-called Columbia Canyon, the Columbia River Canyon, and down into Arrowhead or Revelstoke itself, Eagle Pass, it's absolutely fascinating. And if you look at Revelstoke, long, long history. First individual to go through Revelstoke was really a person apart from almost anyone else. He was afraid of Indians. He was afraid of starving to death. He was afraid of drowning, afraid of getting lost. He was afraid of almost everything and everyone. His name was David Thompson. He was called Kukusint by the Indians, man who looks at stars. He was the greatest cartographer or map maker who ever walked the North American continent. In his lifetime, he died in poverty, but in his lifetime, he mapped 1.5 million square miles.
And accurately, too.
Accurately. Northwest man, died in poverty, I believe in London, somewhere in Great Britain. And man I have a great admiration for. I've looked at some of his original maps, absolutely striking. Can't believe it. He was the one individual who came down the Columbia, 1811, eventually went right down to the mouth of the Columbia, right down to Astoria, and missed by a few years because he was so busy map making. But he was the first guy to pass by what we call the Little Dalles, which was a very, very dangerous section of rapids and falls in the Columbia River, which eventually drowned scores and scores of men.
Well, there's the Dalles down in Washington State, too, or is that
That's the Big Dalles.
The Big Dalles.
This is the Little Dalles.
And Thompson never was on the river that's named after him.
Strange.
Too busy doing the Columbia, I guess. But somebody recognized his work and discovered a river that was worth his name.
His contemporaries knew he was a genius. They were right.
But he was scared of everything. That's an amazing thing. Well, he didn't let his phobia stand in the way of progress.
Well,
all right. Now, the word name boat encampment, that was a name that was given to the area which was to become Revelstoke. Whose boat?
well, fairly close
Where
to
was this?
Revelstoke. Not exactly. It's upriver from Revelstoke. So this is where the Courrier de Bois and the fur traders, they camped after an arduous journey. And Revelstoke was downriver from boat encampment.
Okay, good to know. Take a break. Be back in just a second and talk about the evolution of the place now known as Revelstoke after these words. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barley, and we're talking about the area which became Revelstoke. Now, for some reason, Revelstoke and gold do not mean the same thing to me. Somehow I think of Revelstoke as railway junction, but the concept of gold didn't occur to me.
I have an entirely different opinion. When I think of Revelstoke, I think of the Big Bend. When I think of the Big Bend, I think of the Big Bend Gold Rush, which started in 1864.
Now, why do they call it Big Bend? What's Big Bend here?
Big Bend, the big curve of the Columbia.
As
That
it
is-
goes north up
Sure.
the Canal Flats and then south down through the Arrow Lakes Valley.
Well, yes, that's right.
that's
It starts
a big
up
loop.
the Canal Flats area and then circles down. One of the great rivers in North America, as you well know. And in 1864, Mike, some prospectors actually coming up from the Wild Horse area, way down in the southern part of British Columbia, decided to prospect north. They came into the Big Bend country, discovered some very, very good placer gold creeks. Downey Creek was one, and French Creek was another, and McCullough Creek was another, and Gold Stream was another, and the nuggets ranging up to 1 pound, 2 pounds, very coarse gold, tough ground, huge boulders, but some of these miners stayed with it for years, Mike, absolutely for years. So from 1864, Chinese miners, white miners, some of the Chinese stayed with it right after the turn of the century. Some of the white miners stayed with it right into the 1890s. Some were still working those those areas in the 1940s.
Now, you managed to come up with just a great artifact here. This is, we've talked about gold scales before, and you own how many sets of gold scales?
Probably 20 sets, yeah.
Now, this particular set comes right from that country, and written on the bottom, it says, Raymond Allen, Big Bend, Goldstream, Revelstoke, 1898, British Columbia. Now, this, obviously, I mean, that kind of ratification is just wonderful to get.
You know, I can understand why Raymond Allen liked this gold scales. My favorite gold scales.
These aren't?
They really
They're not
are.
the biggest.
No, they aren't the biggest. I have a lot of very nice gold scales, but as far as gold scales that are made by white men, this is my favorite. It balances perfectly. Made by one of the great gold scales makers, Henry Tromner of Philadelphia, and I can see why Raymond Allen loved this gold scales. I still use it. Have always liked it. Got them years and years ago, and. So this touches on the Big Bend, and the Big Bend does influence Revelstoke, and always has. You have beyond Revelstoke, you have the Big Bend. But after 1864, after this rush, British Columbia joins Confederation in 1871. And one of the conditions, Mike, of joining Confederation, the Confederation of Canada, was that the Canadian government had to finish a transcontinental railroad. So they had to drive this railroad right through the Rockies. And that meant if they drove it through the Rockies, they had to go through various passes. Well, they had a lot of surveyors up there. One was a guy called Rogers. He discovered a pass he felt they should go through. This was Rogers Pass. Yeah. So this went through the Rockies, and then they had to, Kicking Horse Pass went through the Selkirks, and then through the Monashees with Eagle Pass. So you had you know, the three passes in a row. Some of the toughest railroad building country, I think, in anywhere on the Pacific Slope. You look down on the Kootenai country, lots of tough stuff down there. But mile for mile, probably nothing matched that country between the crest of the Rockies or even the Alberta side and coming right over through Kicking Horse and Eagle and the other Rogers Pass.
Well, even when they tried to go on the surface, I mean, they got wiped out by land, by snowslides.
Sure.
So they had to put that huge tunnel through Rogers Pass in order to avoid that, and that must have been
it was
awesome.
Just absolutely brutal. And so while they were doing this, while they were putting that railroad coming from the east and coming from the west, they were driving towards that Revelstoke, Seymour Arm, Sicamous
area. They were going to meet somewhere in
Sure.
there.
But one guy was way ahead of them. Speculator, very interesting speculator. Arthur Stanhope Farwell. Now, Arthur Stanhope Farwell was originally the Surveyor General of British Columbia. And he knew, with his background experience in surveying, where the CPR had to put that line to cross the Columbia.
Yes.
So he works all through that country in 1883, Mike, very important, and he preempts about 175 acres. He's given that by the Crown, so he had connections, because the British Columbia government really had said there would be no speculation in this area.
That was an agreement they had with the CPR.
With the federal government.
With the federal government.
Yes, and the CPR understood that agreement wasn't in effect or in force, but evidently it wasn't. So he goes in there, and they grant him 175 acres. And then he wants another 1,000 acres beyond that. And this doesn't go down too well with the CPR, but he decides he has the right spot. He builds a little community on both sides, and the major community he builds on the east side of the river, which he modestly names Farwell after himself.
Well, that seems appropriate. I mean, name the town after yourself.
Well, the CPR didn't think so. They didn't like Farwell at all. But the CPR had other problems, Mike, and their problems were mainly money. They were on the verge of bankruptcy all the time. That run through the Rockies and through the Selkirks and through the Monashees had cost them much more than they anticipated. So we have 700,000 or 800,000 men working from the east towards the west. They are not getting paid. They are not happy. They miss the first week's pay, then they miss the second week's pay, and a riot starts. And there to confront them, fortunately for the CPR, is the one Northwest Mounted policeman who could probably do the job successfully, Samuel Benfield Steele. And Samuel Benfield Steele is often called the Lion of the North. Probably the most well-known of all the Northwest policemen. His sergeant, by the way, has an interesting name. He's called Fury.
Sergeant Fury and Sam Steele.
And Sam Steele.
And how big a contingent is this? The two of them, or how many?
6 constables plus those 2.
8?
Yeah, 8
8
altogether.
in the face of...
Maybe 9. It may be 9, and I haven't checked the records precisely to see whether it's 8 or 9. So anyway, they're facing this. The riot starts, led by a guy called Bean. And Bean is a contractor. He hasn't been paid. He can't pay his men. He goes down to a saloon, gets them all roused up, along with a woman in red who was definitely a woman of questionable virtue. And so she lends her hand to that, too. And they get all liquored up, and they start towards, they're going to destroy the whole area, including probably a lot of the work that's being done by the bridge crew and by the track lane crew. And Steele has sent a guy on an errand, and he decides, the one single Northwest Mounted policeman decides to arrest him. He's unsuccessful. He's beaten up by the mob. He comes back to Steele. Steele sends out 3 individuals. They're unsuccessful. They're roughed up too. Finally, he sends out 5, and they go down there, and they are partially successful. He says, get tough with them this time. And they hear a shot ring out. The guy who was with Steele, a guy called Johnson, says, I think one of them's gone to hell, Steele. He said he figured one of the riders had been killed by Sergeant Fury. He wasn't. He was shot through the shoulder. And so anyway, they start coming back towards the Northwest Mounted Police headquarters. And Steele, who's on his deathbed, Mike, on his deathbed, they thought, because he had Rocky Mountain fever, thought he would not survive. He drags himself to his feet, grabs a Winchester, levers some shells into the Winchester, and lurches down towards the bridge at Beaver Mouth. And there he meets the mob. He pulls out the riot act, he reads them the riot act, and then he follows up with some very timely advice. If anybody tries to get across over here, we're going to mow you down. And that diffuses the crowd. And they bring back Behan, who was knocked unconscious by one of the Northwest Mounted policemen, and they put him in jail. And by the way, Steele was quite fair. He only fined them $100 each, realizing it wasn't entirely their fault.
I mean, he knew what the riot was a legitimate expression of anger, but he had to uphold the law.
But his maintain le droit, which is the old,
of course,
motto of maintain the right motto of the Northwest Mounted Police. So he did his job, but he also kind of tempered it slightly. And that was 1885. And of course, what happens after that? The CPR finally gets help, and they manage to drive from the east and drive from the west, and they meet at Craigellachie. And this is between Sycamoose and Revelstoke, and there they drive the last spike.
Now, this is probably the single most famous picture, and in Pierre Burton's books, this particular picture is shown.
Sure.
And the man driving the spike, Donald Smith?
Donald Smith, yeah.
That's this bearded gentleman here.
Over to his right, which would be to the left of the photograph, is Van Horn, one of the other principals. A lot of navvies, a lot of workmen, a lot of construction workers. Very interesting guy in the center. He looks like a young kid there, Mike, if you can see him.
Yeah.
And this is Edward Mallandine. And Edward Mallandine was a guy who left Victoria, wanted to fight in the real rebellion. He's 17 years old. He's not 12 like he looks in the picture. He's 17. And he decides he gets there too late. The war with Riel is over by late 1885, so he decides to freight between Farwell and Eagle Pass. And he sets up a freighting company and makes it pay.
And he's here, and this guy, this arrogant look on his face, he knows this is a historical moment.
You bet. He edged himself in front of a lot of the CPR dignitaries, and he remembered it to his dying day. In fact, he returned to this spot 59 years later in 1944 when they were reenacting the scene. Of course, he's the only guy there in 1944 who'd been there in 1885.
I think it's just great that the photograph commemorates this 17-year-old kid's understanding he was part of history there. Yeah. So I guess once the railway's completed, Revelstoke just booms.
No, doesn't, Mike. What happens is the litigation between Farwell and the CPR, who hates him still, continues. And now they draw on the provincial government of British Columbia and the government of Canada. So this litigation lasts for about 10 years. Right till 1897. So between 1886 and 1897, Revelstoke is essentially at a standstill because people don't know whether they should buy the lot from the CPR or buy it from Farwell. In the end, the CPR essentially has their way. Lower Town was Farwell, Upper Town is really CPR territory. But after 1897, Revelstoke does go ahead, and very, very rapidly. Between about 97, Mike, and 1914, those are the growth years of Revelstoke. Canadian Imperial or Canadian Bank of Commerce comes in, some other banks come in. We have a number of hotels. We have the CPR, we have the Central Hotel, we have the Occidental, we have the Regent, we have the Revelstoke, have the Victoria.
Selkirk's in there,
in there, sure. So there are 6 or 7 or 8 hotels, many businesses. There are freighting businesses, there are forwarding businesses. There are businesses that are attracted to a railroad divisional point. And a lot of fascinating people are in Revelstoke. Big Italian community, Mike, who stays there. They tend to follow the CPR, did in those days. Find that all through the Kootenays. Find a number of Chinese. For instance, the wife of one of the Chinese, a guy called Hua Chung. He was about 40. She was 18. She literally stopped traffic in Revelstoke.
Boy, she was so beautiful?
Absolutely stunning. She was called the Heavenly Jewel. And the Heavenly Jewel would walk down the street of Revelstoke at 18 years old, and people were just staggered by her absolute beauty. And so Revelstoke is really quite an intriguing town. There's not much doubt about it. It had a lot of the buildings are were of brick and stone after Farwell had been burned down in 1886. And that main part of Revelstoke, Mike, all through those years has essentially remained intact. It's
Well, the Selkert's still there, I guess, and a lot of the buildings,
a lot of the hotels.
and they're making much of their historic background, which is great.
They've been very, very careful. I was just in there a little while ago and looking at their museum, which is a classic museum, very nice museum, for what I consider a small town. And the rest of Revelstoke is very enjoyable. You can wander around Revelstoke, and your mind's eye goes back to the early 1900s or the late 1890s. It is really quite a fascinating town.
Yeah, when a place is a divisional point, it has a lot of people working shift. I mean, the railways, you've got the switching yards, you've got all the industry that is railways, and a lot of people, because, of course, they're changing shifts, and one guy's heading east, another guy's heading west.
Sure.
Lots of bustle.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a rough kind of town, too, in its day.
Yeah, you had a lot of gamblers in Revelstoke because it was a divisional point, and there was a regular payroll, and they worked their way through Revelstoke. Revelstoke was one of their stopping places, and you had the freight coming in and being forwarded from Revelstoke, and so it was a big town, an interesting town.
All right. We've got some items to take a look at here. There's all sorts of pieces that will bring us to the attention. Well, a CPR man would know what this is. What's that?
You bet. Well, that's actually a coupling pin, and many a good CPR man, an older CPR man, would be wandering around a few years ago minus several fingers because he wasn't quite quick enough in coupling one car to another, and he would get caught. And they would lose not much compensation.
All right, that's that. And there's also a shovel here, the likes of which I have never seen before. I've never seen one with the biggest payload as this.
Yeah, that's that CPR shovel. 1880s probably, Mike. Maybe the early 1880s, riveted together. And the interesting thing is, very short handle.
Yeah.
CPR didn't want people to break the handles. They'd rather have them break their backs. So they had short handle rather than a handle about 1.5 times as long as this. And so the leverage would come from the back, not from the handle.
What a brute that is.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. And we've got well, that probably was used in the riot. These were probably manacles.
Yes, those handcuffs would be similar.
Got a couple of tokens here from, let's see, this is the Central Hotel.
Yeah, that's one of the hotels we named.
Yeah, Central Hotel in Revelstoke, and these are given to their customers for use in what? How would they use these?
Well, they would be used as a come-on, really. They would give one of those, and so if a drink cost 25 cents, they'd have to have 5 of those. They'd have to make frequent trips before they get a free drink. Sometimes it was 12.5 cents, sometimes, you know.
This is McKinnon Brothers in Revelstoke,
Yeah.
and this was good for 5 cents.
And you'll see their sign in one of the photographs we have in the program, Mike.
Yeah, good stuff. And right here, a strong box, and this requires a certain a solid. You got to be strong to collect, I guess.
For sure. You're not going to run away with a CPR strong box very easily. We had a tough time, 2 of us carrying that in this morning. It weighs a couple of 100 pounds, empty. And full, of course, it will weigh about 400 or 500 pounds, depending what they had in it, Mike. Good strong box, CPR express car stuff.
And that would be in the express cars.
You bet it would.
Carrying the valuables there.
1 or more.
Such a thing. Good and solid. As you might expect, there are some treasure stories to be told.
One good one.
And we're going to do that right after we take this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley, and we're talking about Revelstoke, and I mentioned that there's a treasure story here, and I would immediately assume it was gold because of what you told me about the Big Bend, but no, again, I'm wrong.
Sorry, Mike, silver.
Silver.
And not entirely unusual for that area. Some gold in the Big Bend, but as you work over towards Seymour Arm, there's more silver.
Seymour Arm's on the Shuswap,
That's
and
on
you
the
have to go
Shuswap.
through Eagle Pass in order to get to that.
Yeah, that's right. And the thing is, what happened is this. There was a trail from Seymour Arm, upper part of Seymour Arm, right over to the Big Bend in the 1860s. And sometime in the mid-1860s, a couple of guys got off the trail, and they hit a very promising vein of silver. They evidently mined it and made a number of shipments to San Francisco. Whether that was enough or not, we don't know, but they did disappear. They vanished out of the area. In 1897, there were 3 guys from Revelstoke, a guy named Douglas, a guy named Mackenzie, and a guy named Jack Leslie. They come, this is 1897, this is probably 30-odd years later, and they come into town, and they come into the Selkirk Hotel. And with them, they're carrying about a 40-pound chunk of very, very high-grade galena, which means it's very high in natural silver. And They put it down on the bar, and this is the tale they unfold. They were walking the old trail, which is partially overgrown by that time, and for some reason, they go off the old trail, and they come across an old log cabin that was, well, it was made of logs, but it was kind of an A-frame. It's abandoned, and it's been abandoned for years. It's in a state of disintegrating. They decide to take a look inside. They see some samples like this, Mike.
This is the galena?
Which we call float, that's
Yeah.
right. And they look inside, and there are quite a few samples lying around inside the old remains of this cabin. So they start looking, circling out from the cabin around the area, and they come across a series of ledges, 3 ledges, and they're about 30 or 40 feet tall. And the center ledge has a very good vein of silver running through it. And so they get up there, and they can almost walk along it like a sidewalk. And they look at that, and it's so good, they decide to stake it. And they call it the Trapper, one of the claims, and the other one they call the Last Cabin. Now, that's great. And they unfold this tale, and people are all interested, and they leave the sample on the bar in Selkirk. It's reported in the paper at the time, and so it's all documented.
Yeah.
But when you look in the report of the Minister of Mines in the index, which runs from 1874 to 1936, it records every claim that was ever recorded. And in that district, there is no trapper, and there is no lost cabin. There are in other areas, such as the Slocan, but not in the Revelstoke district. And it was a mining district at the time.
Well, what would that lead you to believe?
I think they paper staked it. They didn't record it. They paper staked it and did not record it.
Like in the local Revelstoke newspaper, what were they trying to attract? Some investors or?
No, I don't think so. Evidently, their reputation was intact. So I don't think they were mining the public rather than the ground. Why they didn't follow it up, or whether they did follow it up, I don't know. I do know, however, that these individuals did not actually record the claims they said they were going to record.
Well, why? Why?
I don't know.
They're
There are a
stupid.
number of answers.
Yeah.
They may have mined it out, they may have found it pinched out, they may have drilled it, may have found it didn't go anywhere. But remember, that part of that country is known for some high-grade silver in that Shuswap country, right around Scott Creek and in that immediate vicinity.
So we should immediately head up to the Big Bend and take the trip over to the arm of the Shuswap Lake and look for a sideway of silver ore.
No, I don't think it's one of our more promising stories, but it's interesting in that it is documented.
And how long did that lump of silver remain in the Selkirk Hotel?
It disappeared probably about 10 years later, as they usually do. Good ore samples have a way of disappearing.
Who knows? This piece of galena could be from that.
Could be.
All right. I like the realization that there's gold up in the Big Bend, and they found it there, and that nothing like having this Fergus, this guy who founded Revelstoke. Did he make any money? Farwell make any money off the CPR?
Yeah, he made quite a bit of money.
Yeah?
Yeah, he did.
Well, good. Anyway, that's a good story. Revelstoke, which started off as Farwell and went all the way back to David Thompson, the great map maker. A great story today on Gold Trails and Ghost Towns, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for joining us.